The Torchbearer. Marie clutched the rough fabric of her brother's coat, her knuckles white with tension. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood and the sweat of desperate men and women. All around her, Paris burned. "Stay close," Jacques muttered, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow as they crept through the narrow alleyways. The distant crack of musket fire punctuated the night, along with shouts of anger and pain. Marie tried not to look at the bodies they passed, some still, others writhing in agony. It had all happened so quickly. One moment, life in the city had been proceeding as usual, marked by the typical grumbling about King Charles X and his ministers. The next, the streets had erupted into chaos. The king's decrees dissolving the Chamber of Deputies and restricting the press had been the spark that set the powder keg ablaze. Marie and Jacques had been swept up in the enthusiasm, joining their neighbors in erecting barricades and arming themselves with whatever they could find. But the reality of revolution was far uglier than the stirring speeches and songs had led them to believe. Jacques suddenly yanked Marie back as they rounded a corner, pressing them both against a wall. A patrol of royal guards marched past, their bayonets gleaming in the flickering light of burning buildings. Marie held her breath until they disappeared from view. "We need to get to the square," Jacques whispered. "That's where the main force is gathering. We'll be safer there." Marie nodded, though she wasn't sure anywhere was truly safe tonight. As they resumed their furtive journey, her mind wandered to their parents, to the little shop where they sold books and pamphlets. She prayed they had heeded the warnings and fled the city. A woman's scream pierced the night, followed by the shattering of glass. Marie flinched, but Jacques urged her onward. "We can't help everyone," he said, his voice thick with regret. "We have to focus on the bigger picture." The bigger picture. Marie wasn't even sure what that meant anymore. Freedom. Democracy. An end to tyranny. The lofty ideals that had seemed so clear yesterday now felt muddied by the blood and chaos surrounding them. As they neared the square, the sounds of battle grew louder. Rounding the final corner, Marie gasped at the sight before her. Hundreds of people swarmed the open space, brandishing various weapons, muskets, swords, kitchen knives and farm tools. The air was thick with smoke and the flickering light of torches. And there, atop a mound of rubble and broken furniture, stood a figure that made Marie's heart skip a beat. A woman, her clothes torn and dirty, held aloft the tricolor flag of the revolution. Her face was fierce, determined, as she rallied the crowd with impassioned words Marie couldn't quite make out over the din. "There." Jacques pointed. "That's where we need to be." As they pushed their way through the crowd, Marie felt a surge of renewed purpose. The woman with the flag embodied everything they were fighting for: liberty, equality, a chance at a better future. For a moment, the horrors of the night receded, replaced by a glimmer of hope. Suddenly, a roar filled the air. Marie saw a wall of royal guards advancing on the square, their muskets leveled, and time seemed to slow as she watched the muzzle flash and heard the whistling of bullets all around her. "Get down!" Jacques shouted, shoving her to the ground. Marie felt the impact knock the wind from her lungs. As she gasped for air, she saw Jacques stagger, a crimson stain blossoming on his shirt. "No!" she screamed, crawling to her brother as he collapsed. She pressed her hands to the wound, feeling his life seep between her fingers. Jacques looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "Keep fighting," he managed to whisper before his body went limp. Marie felt something inside her shatter. The fear, the doubt, the hesitation, all of it burned away, replaced by a rage unlike anything she had ever known. She stood heedless of the bullets still flying, and grabbed a musket from a fallen fighter. As she turned to face the advancing guards, she saw the flag-bearer again. The woman was no longer atop the rubble, but in the thick of the fighting, leading a charge against the royal forces. Their eyes met briefly, and Marie saw her fury and determination mirrored there. Without thinking, Marie ran forward, adding her voice to the battle cry that rose from the revolutionaries. She fired her musket, watching a guard fall, then used the weapon as a club when there was no time to reload. The following minutes were a blur of violence and chaos. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the fight was over. The remaining guards threw down their weapons and fled, leaving the square in the hands of the revolutionaries. A cheer went up from the crowd, but Marie felt no joy. She stumbled back to where Jacques lay, cradling his head in her lap as tears finally came. She didn't know how long she sat there before she felt a hand on her shoulder. Looking up, she saw the flag-bearer standing over her, the tricolor still clutched in one hand. Without a word, the woman helped Marie to her feet, then pressed the flag into her hands. "Your brother's sacrifice will not be forgotten," she said, her voice hoarse from shouting. "But our fight is not over. Will you carry this forward?" Marie looked at the flag, then back at Jacques. She thought of all they had endured, all they had lost. But she also thought of the future they had dreamed of, a future worth fighting for. Slowly, Marie nodded. She gripped the flag tightly and raised it high, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, she turned to face the battered but unbroken crowd. "For liberty," she cried, her voice ringing across the square. "For France." The roar that answered her shook the very foundations of the city. As Marie stood there, the flag held high, she knew that whatever came next, the torch of revolution would continue to burn bright.